Brought to you by Citricom. Welcome to Connecting the Channel. Here we talk with industry leaders on successes, failures, and lessons learned along the way.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Meredith Caram, Vice President of Sales here at Citricom. Thank you for joining us today for the Connecting the Channel podcast. Today with me, I have a guest, Jay McBain, who is a Principal Analyst with Forrester. I'm super excited. Hi, Jay. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. So, how excited are you for this holiday season coming up?
It has been quite the year. So from pandemics to pandemonium and murder hornets, I think we're all ready to celebrate, kind of the end of the year and the move into the next year.
And we were talking the other day how I saw your Thanksgiving feast on social media, actually behind the scenes of what your kitchen looked like. And so for those folks who don't follow you on social media, they should, Jay McBain. And but for those folks who didn't see the picture, describe to us what was happening in that kitchen.
Yeah, I always love behind the scenes because everyone posts a picture of their, Thanksgiving turkey and their meal, and everything looks so perfect. And you get all your fancy china, out and everything else. And nobody ever posts a picture of what it took to make that table. So I was just walking by and I was laughing because I think every cabinet was open and things were all over the floors and there's things dripping everywhere. And, all things were going on in the picture. And it reminds me of, behind the scenes in Hollywood or behind the scenes even of this podcast. It always looks great. And then you take a picture and you see all the stuff behind the scenes. And I always like those pictures the most.
Yeah, well, it was fun. And it looked like you had a feast. And so that's great. And then I also see you posting quite a bit of your family fitness. And so it seems like you try to keep a really good balance. And so have you always been like that? Or is that just recent with the pandemic this year, trying something new?
We've kind of changed our fitness. I've played hockey. I'm a Canadian, so by law, we have to play hockey. So I've played twice a week since I've been 3 years old. And that was, that gets my heart rate up and it kind of, for me, checks off all the fitness goals. But given COVID, no more hockey. So I looked around and trying to figure, I hate to run. So after about 100 meters, I'm done. So I looked around and road biking is something I've done for a while. I've got a reasonable race bike. And I just started, going on 30, 40, 50, 60 mile runs every weekend. And I'm at the point now, 8 months into the pandemic, where I've ridden my bike the equivalent of Miami to Toronto. So I put on some significant mileage and I'm just running up. I'm in Florida, so I get to run up and down A1A, which is right on the ocean. And, the weather's 80 degrees in winter. Again, being a Canadian is kind of odd. But just watching the ocean, it's just kind of a relaxing way to, kind of burn calories.
Yeah, I think it's fabulous. Speaking of running, I always say I'm only running if someone's chasing me.
Right.
But I have definitely tried to get more heart healthy this season, and something that I am taking forward with me into 2021. But whenever we look at 2020, and as you talk about behind the scenes, just as your Thanksgiving feast at your house, I always can count on you to give us the truth as to what's going on in the channel, and then some predictions as to what we should prepare for. And so kind of wrap up for us with what are some takeaways from 2020 that the partner community that you see, major takeaways, and then let's get into how do we pivot in the next I think we have 20 business days until the new year, and what happens then in January.
Yeah, so there's some things that happened this year that were unprecedented, that have never happened in the 40 years of the modern technology channel as we look at it. The one thing that jumped out was the different categories of products and the effects of COVID. For the first time in our industry history, we had lower performing categories like computer infrastructure down by 17%. Telco infrastructure was down by 60%. System integration and tech consulting, kind of some of the core of the channel, was down by 15%. On the other side of the ledger, last week, Microsoft announced 48% growth of Azure inside of COVID. And that's 2 quarters in. The last quarter was 47% growth. They're actually growing their strength inside of COVID with cloud acceleration. Google Cloud and others, showed similar. We've seen SaaS companies in the 30s. So you're looking at your business as a partner, and on one side, some of your business is down by 17, and on the other side, it's up by 48, and security is way up. And you've got to make decisions now where this is a pretty big spectrum. And over the next year, because of the second wave of COVID, 2021 is going to be a very similar environment. We're not expecting a big K-shaped or V-shaped or any kind of shape recovery now, probably into 2022. So partners have to relook at the situation, relook at where the money is going forward, which we'll switch gears into next.
Yeah. And so whenever you look at partners and not only growing their business, but also protecting what they have, like and these threats that could be out there for how do you serve your customer? How do you have a professional engagement over video, or over audio versus like if you are sitting right in front of them or going out to lunch? Like, how should partners prepare, to make that pivot?
Yeah, so there's a number of trends that we've been watching for years. I mean, these have been accelerated via COVID, but they're not new. The one trend is what you just said, the new customer, the new buying journey, the new buying psychology. One thing is we're going through, and the channel's going through right now, a big demographic turnover, where in technology buying at a business level, the majority of buyers are going to be millennial within 4 or 5 years. So we're just kind of going through that changeover now. And we have Generation Z who now have their first jobs out of college. And we're going through that change. But the change that we saw to digital journeys and then digital only journeys, where customers, the future of buying looks a lot like consumer. Buying software or buying hardware kind of looks like buying a car. You get to the dealership, you know more than the salesperson ever will. You know the invoice price, you've already configured it. You know exactly how the cylinders in the engine run. I mean, you're so smart as a consumer that whole 8 hours at the dealership is wasted. Well, this modern buyer and this new buyer in the technology space is kind of like that. They're doing everything in their power to avoid sales calls. They're doing everything in their power to avoid filling out your web form with the correct information. If you force them to, they'll use their burner email account to do it. So 68% of your technology buyers are wanting to go through this digital journey, and many of them digital only journey, to the point now where if you look at business applications and SaaS and other parts of the cloud market, the majority of buying is done in this digital only journey. They never talk to a salesperson. They're making a vendor selection and buying 7 different things without ever going into a sales or marketing cycle, which means you might have lost a deal without ever knowing there was a deal.
Yeah. And so, in the partner community, I then think about, okay, am I good with what I have? How secure are the relationships that I have? And then what do I need to do differently to see, like from a positioning perspective, what's going on within my customer base? And so as you think about the buyer's journey, as you talk about, and conversations changing and not being face-to-face, like with all the research that you do, because I love all these stats you have. Like that's one of my most favorite things. And I always learn from you at every place you go. I pick up some new nugget. So 1, I'd like to know, like, where does all your data come from? And 2, what is like one thing that partners could do to make sure that they're not missing out on an opportunity with their customer, because that could then allow for a new threat to where their current business is now at risk?
Yeah, great question. So the data and all of the research I do, I think my dad was an accountant. So I grew up like counting everything. And, by the time I was 11, I counted every nickel that I made in a computer program. And, just all my pictures became digital and all my documents became scanned. And my entire life was built around like technology and counting things. So when somebody says the channel's large, I actually go and build out the 16 different types of partners in a big Venn diagram. And I add up the millions of partners and the millions of more coming in, and I publish it. Here is like the census for the channel as it sits, kind of today. And then when I look at, what partners read and where they go. Quickly I create a little spreadsheet as I'm surfing around the internet, and I find out that there's 54 magazines that the average channel partner around the world may read. There's 64 top podcasts that they listen to on the way to work or when they're out for a run. I look at, there's 24 associations, and that's where I met you, at an association sitting on the board. There's 24 of them, and all kinds of board members and communities and committees and things there. There's vendor communities. The average partner will have, upwards of 10 to 20 different relationships with vendors. So they'll hang out in those communities, distributor communities, peer groups. I follow the 99 LinkedIn groups they're in, the 25 Facebook groups and the subreddits. I know that they're invited to 150 events a year. So I've always got fascinated with all of this sphere of influence around a partner, what they listen to, what they read. We all get 300 emails, but what are the 3 they actually open and read and trust? And then I always double click and find out who are the people behind all this. So when you read a magazine, who's on the front cover? Who are they talking about? When you listen to a podcast, who's the host? When you go to a show, who's up there keynote speaking, who didn't pay to be on stage? When you go to an association, who's on the board? Mm-hmm. When you count it all up, when you score it all up, I actually published the top 100 people by score after, tracking 5,000 people in our industry. So if you want to listen to, the future of VoIP, the future of UCAS, the future of telecommunication, all these things, it surrounds about, the law of a few. If you read Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, it's not millions of people influencing millions of people. It's a core set of small people, and all these people. They're just omnipresent, and they're thought leaders and they're influencers. And, as a partner, you tend to trust a smaller network or a community of people to run your business and make decisions and to better serve your client.
Yeah, so I love this because another thing I've learned from you is this whole concept of the channel ecosystem and how everybody works together. And like you were talking about with your Venn diagram and all of your numbers, and this means this, and this is how everyone's connected. And when you get into influencers, so in the partner community, as like suppliers, as a vendor, how do we know who the influencers are in the partner community?
It's a great question. So that's one of the biggest changes, and one of the biggest changes looking forward is the ecosystem is going to change the word channel. The channel, as we've known it from August the 12th, 1981, from that first IBM PC. I worked at IBM 17 years. In that first channel that was then exploded by Compaq, who they signed up everybody who could fog a mirror. And then Microsoft, who then signed up everybody who couldn't fog a mirror. And then we got up to this point where Microsoft has 355,000 partners active and 700,000 signed up. The channel, as we've known it for 40 years, has always been wrapped around transaction. 64% of the $3.5 trillion that's spent on technology today flows through to and with partners. That's huge, 2/3 of every dollar. And that's kind of hit a plateau because it's not as important anymore who actually takes the customer's money, but who drives the value around it. And that's the ecosystem. So 2 things have changed. If you think of this as a quadrant, there are transacting partners, and we know exactly who they are and how much they do and the distribution behind it. Then there are non-transacting partners, is what you said. These influencers early in that digital journey, we know on average there's 5 of them. Every customer has 5 people around the table in these virtual seats that influence them all the way, in a majority of cases, to vendor selection. They are the salespeople, even though they aren't the salespeople in a lot of cases. So the influence has to be done by attribution, because you don't get distributor sales reports and you don't get ways to measure linear how a partner does. So like the consumer model, these are the Kim Kardashians. These are the people that run an Instagram ad, and you're trying to figure out how much that Instagram ad, profited you, and hopefully over $1 million is what cost you the ad. So there are consumer-based attribution companies that are now coming into the B2B space. They're on my channel software tech stack because it's not Kim Kardashian, but there's these 100 influencers, and I want to know who has the biggest influence because I want to spend money with them. If I make them bigger and better and faster and cheaper, if I make them better, I win more business. And I have no way of today of measuring influence. And that's coming soon. So that's a future trend that we're watching really, really closely. And Wall Street is behind this as well. They think that this future of attribution in B2B is going to be a huge multi-billion-dollar market.
And then what about like marketing? I mean, in these, since 1981, right? And this past decade and 20 years, I mean, all this like MDF we hear about, marketing development funds, and everybody's sponsoring all these shows, and how much money do you have? This whole pay to play. How does that look differently next year? Does it still look the same as it has been? Or do you start to see a different kind of new phase? Similar like when you and I were on the community group together, the board for, emerging technologies. Like if we take it this like a view from a marketing perspective within the channel community and the ecosystem, like how does everybody all get along there?
Yeah, there's a massive change in marketing. So I talked about transacting partners versus non-transacting. There are traditional partners and non-traditional partners. So in this ecosystem of all these different cluster of partners who do different things and provide different value, the easiest way to think about marketing is think about the customer journey. We've talked a lot about influence right from the first time they thought they had a problem or needed an outcome to vendor selection. There's the phase between vendor selection and transaction that I think we all understand really, really well. And now every company in every industry is becoming a subscription consumption-based business. So just in the last 30, 60 days, IBM cut out its services division and is now only 100% consumption subscription company. Dell announced the same thing. You saw Cisco announce the same thing. And HPE, who's been on this journey for a couple of years, 3 years now, just announced by 2022, so 13 months from now, they'll be fully there. So when you think of the traditional channel, like 10 years, 20 years ago, what made up 80% of your revenue, like companies like that, are now going 100% subscription consumption model. From a marketing perspective, the transaction is now the first 30 days with the customer. Now, you're going to start spending marketing dollars on getting adoption of your product. As we know in SaaS and we know in the cloud, adoption equals retention and renewal. I'm going to pay money for adoption. I'm also going to pay money, number two, for integrations and stickiness. The further integrated my product is into the stack of the customer, the harder it is to unplug, which drives lifetime value. I'm going to pay for that. And the third thing I'm going to pay for is upsell and cross-sell forever. No company has stopped innovating. Every 30 days, your product's going to get better. And every 30 days, your portfolio is going to get better, bigger and broader. So you need a channel out there that is, every 30 days forever with a client, showing them this new portfolio and showing them this new innovation and getting them to enrich their contract. This trifurcated model is the biggest difference in marketing. So at the beginning, I need to influence the influencers, and I have to get content and messaging and collateral to 35 million permutations. So I have to get to a channel who can pave that last mile and, co-author ebooks and white papers and podcasts and the 30 things we need to do, social media and search, to get to that early buyer digitally, early and often. My marketing has to work the way it works in vendor selection and transaction. And then now my marketing continues. Every 30 days forever, the campaign never ends. The nurturing touch campaigns never end because I'm driving those three: adoption, stickiness, and upsell initiatives forever with all these different kinds of partners. And that's, for a marketer, a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah. And even as a consumer, whether you're a business customer or, a regular like residential type consumer, like in your personal life, I mean, I can tell you, like with this pandemic, I get so much more stuff that I call garbage. Like I don't even call it marketing. I call it garbage that I literally just, grab it all and just delete it. And so there could be like some jewel or gem in there that probably would be interesting to me because there's probably some kind of reason as to why I got it based upon my preferences, right, or views. But I'm so overstimulated with all of that I get that it is completely ineffective for me. And so all those companies that are sending me that stuff, doing this outreach, it's just like, oh, how much garbage can we send her today? Thinking that if they just yell louder, they're going to get my attention. And the only thing it's done is really turn me off. And so, like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, am I the only one that thinks that?
No, and consumer behavior, again, think about the business buyer of the future being a consumer. The way you buy hardware, software, services is going to be the way you buy a car. It's impossible to sell somebody a car that isn't in the mode of needing a car. You're not going to just one day, oh yeah, thank you for that email. I really do need a new car. Thanks. You tend to get into that mode and you dig into the digital journey. That's the critical point where it used to be, as a marketer, hard to figure out those early breadcrumbs and try to figure out when the customer actually comes into your realm. And it's getting harder now because Apple and other big companies, through privacy, are going to cut down your ability to see any of those breadcrumbs. Your ability to surf the web anonymously now, and all the Safaris and Chromes and all the big browsers shutting down the ability to track you. It's going to get so much harder for marketers to figure out who's coming into that journey. So the behavior changes is that I'm going to get more obsessed over the 5 people that customer grabs onto, because those 5 people are going to see the activity directly. So if I don't win one of those 5 seats at the table early in the journey, they don't read my ebook or they don't listen to my podcast, like somehow I haven't caught them or I haven't earned a seat at the table, I better hope that I'm influencing 1, 2, or 3 or more of those people at the table. Because if they don't bring up my solution in that early journey, I'm not going to get to that point of vendor selection, and it's going to be a big problem. So if I can't do it with marketing technology, I'm going to have to go do it with channels. And I'm going to have to figure out what that customer reads, where they go, and who influences them, and make sure I'm influencing the influencers, and I'm investing more in channel people, channel processes, channel programs, and channel technology to go and do that at scale. And that's a huge change in this industry. Accenture did a piece of research where 76% of every CEO in the world, every country, every size of company, every industry, thinks their current business model will be unrecognizable in 5 years. And ecosystems are the number one reason why. The future is going to be built around alliances, partnerships, channels, and over-encompassing all of that ecosystems.
Yeah. So with the 5 people at the table, it's like, it's exciting to get one of those seats because you want to be invited, you want to be at the table, but then you got to keep it. And so, right. So how do you keep it? And I think your point of the partnerships, the alliances, who you're connected to, how you're really transforming yourself and staying up to speed with this buyer's journey, this digital journey, the landscape, what all that looks like is critical. I think it's a really good point for partners. Just as a couple of takeaways, if there were 2 or 3 things you would point out to be like, hey, after, your holiday, Santa comes, whatever you got going on in your house, this is where you need to get busy on to start January. Like, what would be like those 2 or 3 things?
Yeah. So number one, from a vendor side, it's a multiplier, but from a partner side, what is the opportunity for working with the people I work with? In days gone by, you're looking at front end margin and back end margin, and you kind of total that up into your return on invested capital and kind of do the test of, is the pain and suffering worth it? And that's how you make your decisions on vendors. Going forward, to get access to these 40 plus, 30 plus % growing areas of the market, you've got to look beyond that. And because, the transaction only becomes that first 30 days of the customer, even if you make 20 or 30% margin on $9 or $19 per user per month, it's not going to pay your mortgage. So this is a changeover where you need to start looking at the economic value or the ecosystem value for every dollar. And now we're seeing vendors starting to talk in this language. If you sell $1 at Salesforce, there's $4.65 available to partners. 64% of that is professional services, installation, implementation, integration, security, compliance, blah, blah, blah. Google Cloud a couple of weeks ago announced $5.32 of multiplier, going up to $7.80 in 5 years. Microsoft, all the vendors now are starting to talk in these multiplier numbers. As a partner, right after Christmas, after I get over the turkey and everything else, I'm going to get obsessed over the pie chart with the companies I work with. And I'm going to start asking different questions. If I sell $1 of your product, I understand, if I transact how much I make, but tell me what I need to do after the fact so I can make $2 for every dollar you make, and I can go make that at 75% margin. What skills do I need? What training, certifications, what practices do I need to build to go and make sure that I'm talking to the right buyer about the right things and that I'm positioning correctly enough value where I can make double what you make at a similar or better margin than you make it at? That's number one and first and foremost. This changing economy has a different economic underpinning to it, and I got to get on top of that. Number two is I got to understand in an ecosystem that there is no single throat to choke. There is no trusted advisor. It isn't linear. When you go and buy a car, you're doing all these things. You're watching videos, you're reading magazines, you're talking to your neighbor, you're going on a social media. I mean, you're doing a million things because there's 365 kinds of cars. That's a real number. You have to make it one for every day of the year, but you have to make a decision on the one car you're going to buy. So you're going to, thrash through all this stuff to get smart and get it narrowed before you ever hit a dealership. So the thrashing that our customer's doing, you got to understand that even if you earn a seat at the table, there's 4 other people there. You got to build your own partnerships. You got to understand your own ecosystem. You got to look at the the customers that you serve. What industry are they in? What kind of buyer do you serve? What geography are they in? What product, do they, kind of buy? And then what segment, sector, and size? Are they SMB or mid-market? Inside SMB, there's 6 different sectors. All these are important things to ask. And when you start to narrow it down, that's the 35 million permutations. When I get it down into the set of permutations that I serve, I need to ask those questions. What do they read? What do they listen to? Where do they go? And most importantly, who are the 100 people that they trust? Are the super connected people around my customer? And I should have all 100 of those people, because probably 98 of them are non-competitive to me. I should have them all in my own ecosystem. So if I don't earn a seat at that table, one of the 5 seats, one of the people, 2 of the people, 3 of the people that are in my own ecosystem that love me and would endorse me are. So I'm not there initially, but they're going to bring me in, and vice versa. When I'm in on the first 5, I'll bring them in. We'll all share in the 5-time multiplier together.
That's awesome. Thank you. I think that's the best advice. Everybody listening, like Jay McBain, Jay's been doing this for a long time. Speaking of trust, I trust everything that you say. And it's just so insightful. And I know that I can text you and call you and be like, what did you mean by that? Or, hey, where did this come from? And are you sure about this? And so I love getting all of this knowledge from you.
I got one more thing.
Oh, do it. Yes.
You asked me for 3, so I gave you 2.
Yes.
Number 1 was the multiplier. Number 2 is the ecosystem. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about marketplaces.
Okay.
So in COVID, marketplaces, e-commerce grew more in 3 months than in 10 years combined. In the US, 1/3 of the economy now is run via e-commerce marketplaces. So what does this do when the future business buyer becomes like a consumer? The hockey stick behind that is the same. We had predicted about 17% of the tech industry going through marketplaces by 2023. We're now pulling that forward probably into next year. So it's now become a double-digit impact and opportunity for the channel, for vendors, for partners, for everyone, distributors. The fact of the matter is, in a marketplace, you have these super, hyper marketplaces like Amazon and Alibaba. They all have Amazon for business and Alibaba for business. That's going to have an impact. But then you have these super marketplaces. You see Salesforce invest in their App Exchange. You see AWS and Azure and Google. You see IBM and SAP and Oracle. You see ServiceNow and Workday and Marketo and NetSuite. I mean, you see about 20 winning marketplaces now. As a partner, they're starting to invite you into the marketplace. There will be hardware, software, and services there. And just like you try to get on page 1 of Google, you're going to have to go get on page 1 of those marketplaces for particular buyers that serve, that are within your skill set. It's going to be an important go-to-market for you is to have a marketplace strategy.
So how do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you get on page 1?
So it would be the same question we asked, 10 years ago. How do you get on page 1 of Google? Well, there's an algorithm. I need a bunch of backlinks and I need people to say nice things. And if you've got a lot of trust and you say something nice about me, Google will favor that in their algorithm. Like we started to understand what the Google algorithm, like we reverse engineered it. But you're going to have to we're early in this baseball game. So you have to go and reverse engineer these marketplaces. Like AWS runs an algorithm to who they put on page one to a mid-sized clinic buying marketing software. If that's your market, you got to go back out of that algorithm and figure out what you need to do to your listing and to your resume, to your website and other things to go earn the right to get in front of that customer to earn one of those 5 seats. So that's the marketplace strategy. There's also another opportunity for partners and for vendors and distributors are niche marketplaces. I mentioned 35 million permutations. You could be the one that builds the marketplace for mid-sized clinics. So it's HIPAA, it's high-tech compliant. It serves, 50 doctors. It's curated. It's not built for dentist offices. It's not built for small hospitals. So anybody in a mid-sized clinic don't want to go through one of these major Amazon things to try to figure out what they need. You've already done the work of narrowed it down. There's not 175,000 software companies anymore. There's 150 that service that marketplace. There's not, 800,000 Internet of Things and AI and automation and blockchain tools. Now there's like 100 of them. So now you've curated an audience and you could build your own marketplace or participate in niche marketplaces around the markets that you serve. And that's going to be the third successful part of this marketplace. And we all know that this is not going to slow down. Now that we get our groceries this way, now that we know that we have Amazon boxes at our front door right now, we're not going to get out of COVID and just automatically change our behaviors. The demographics and everything else say that it's not going to happen.
And what was in your last Amazon box that showed up on your front porch?
My God, I think we have like 9 of them today, but I've got like little kids that run out and rip them all open. I have to go into my order history and figure out like the 5 things I'm missing. I think I got a cord for my power washer yesterday and it still hasn't popped up. And it's a big thing. It's like a 50-foot cord that is nowhere on the property right now. So it's like a game of scavenger hunt because I'm locked in Zoom meetings all day. So I've got to figure that out.
Well, Jay, thank you. I want to tell you, speaking of like being on the front page and being, the one at the top, like you're always my one that I go to, whether you want to be or not, you just are. Whenever I'm looking for, insights and knowledge and ways that I should be like challenging, my team and how to like provide the right services for partners. And so thank you for joining us today with our Connecting the Channel podcast. I appreciate it. Thanks everybody else for listening. And hopefully we can do this again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Connecting the Channel. Our main focus at Citricom is helping our partners succeed and grow. We're the simplest voice solution to sell and support. To become a Citricom partner or for more information, check out citricom.com.